A very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Gopi Prasad. I'm an urban designer based out of Bangalore, and I have interests both in research, into master plan implementation, and project development. I currently head the practice at IDS Consulting Private Limited, and I'm actively involved in promoting Uru.in, an online information platform that helps citizens to collaborate and to participate in the revised master plan of Bangalore 2031. In this interaction, I'd like to talk about the implementation of the master plan, especially the plan which has been drawn up and published by the BDA called the BDA Revised Master Plan 2031. Now, the 2031 signifies a time horizon for which the plan has been drawn up, which simply means to say that by 2031 many of these objectives and goals of the plan will be achieved through a series of implementation measures. Now, these implementation measures include not only projects which involve construction and development, but also measures such as improvement of livability, quality of life, mobility, transportation, and things that matter to all citizens. So, coming from a point of both a citizen and a professional, it's interesting to ask that how do these plans tend to translate those big ideas on the ground? Are there enough projects being mentioned? Are there enough proposals mentioned in the document? So that is one part of the question. Second, how are those planned proposals and ideas meant to be implemented on the ground or to take shape? So this would be the second part of the question. As we speak about planning and planned proposals in India, it's interesting to note that there are over 2,400 statutory plans, which means legal plans being drawn up by various departments in the country today. So this is interesting because this also includes only statutory plans, and in addition or excluding those plans which are being drawn up for other special projects such as Amrut, Smart City, and large highway projects. So that's a whole lot of plans that are going by, and therefore it's important to see what these plans deliver. And currently, if this is the plan which has been put up, would that be in a position to deliver? Thankfully, Bangalore over the last few decades has seen a series of plans being prepared and partially implemented, I would say. The first plan beginning at the end of 60s in form of the Outline Development Plan, then subsequently the Comprehensive Development Plan, and finally the Revised Master Plan 1, which is the 2015, and the current plan which is taking shape. While one would say the earliest, the plan drawn up in the 1960s also highlights the layout of the first outer ring road in Bangalore. So a plan in some sense has preceded development, and therefore it's interesting to see what this plan can do for a very long term such as 2031. The timeline which is 2031 is also interesting because it kind of gives a certain impetus to think what could be the large scale investments required, what could be the large scale infrastructure requirements in order to host a very large population, not only within the city but also within a very large region. So from a perspective of long-term sustenance and sustainability, it's a good idea to have something which is drawn up from a long horizon, which is 2031. The important aspect in this discussion is how has plan making and plan implementation fared in the Bangalore and Bangalore region. To address that question, one has to look at the components of the plan. Now, while I say the components of the plan, it's very simplistic to say there are two components in the plan. One clearly is the sectoral aspect. What we say as sectoral includes roads, for example, stormwater drainage, water supply, drainage, solid waste management. and a few others which could be a part of the utilities which come under the sector. While land and land related aspects such as the land management, the land use, the activities which take place, the various places which enable people to come together are part of the land use proposals. Now the land use proposals are supposed to be given a larger thrust in the plan. So if one had taken stock of the implementation of the several plans, it will not be too unbiased to ask whether the plans related to the proposals which are including the land and land have been implemented well. Not going too far behind, it will be useful to look at the revised master plan 2015, the current and the or you could call it as the previous predecessor to the 2031 plan, which is in effect. It will be interesting to see what it has accomplished. So I'd like to draw your attention on a particular graphic which is there on the screen, which is about the various aspects that have been implemented through the master plan. So it will be interesting to note that components that require interaction, which are based on land, which require coordination, have not fared very well. Some of them could be such as regulations which require enforcement of buildings. The second could be as for management of the wetlands and valleys or accommodating the large poor or income groups into the mainstream of the plan. If the implementation is weak in those ends, what could be the constraint factors? Because that's very important to understand what has caused these little constraints. I have a little graphic towards this particular point. It's interesting to note that across the city, what has not worked is because there have been too many departments working sometimes in cross purposes, too many laws at a given point of time for the project to easily take shape, and third, long drawn procedural difficulties. So these are kind of very contextual and very inherent to the implementation of the plans. Even when all these are present, all those planning proposals which are dependent on large scale acquisition of land has not really done well. Now let's take an example at a couple of instances. I would say, when I say instances, one could be a proposal related to the valleys. The earlier plan, with a very good intent, had roughly about 12 and a half square kilometers of area being earmarked as the valley zone within the plan. Now, even if one took a small portion in the northern part of the city, about 6 square kilometers of area, and if one had analyzed the number of permissions given in order to build in these areas, those so-called sensitive areas, one would be shocking to see really about 1/3 of it has been officially accorded. And then about equivalent to it, about 1/3 or so has been also been taken over by the informal sector and kind of, built upon. So literally there has been a difficulty in translating a certain theme. Similarly, on the housing front, areas like Horamau and others have seen almost density doubling, in some cases growth percentages over 700%, and built up area growing up to even 10,000% in few pockets and few villages in the northern part. So growth is something that is really not anticipated well in the plan, and maybe it's too far-fetched to say that we can anticipate all kinds of growth. So this calls for a little change in terms of accommodating what could happen in the future, and therefore the plan must kind of respond to that kind of detail. Also, the other aspect which we could call as an example is the large industrial areas, large what I would call as hubs, commercial hubs being proposed in the plan, all dependent on large-scale land acquisition and partnership with the farmers, have not really taken off at all. So this seems to be a cause of concern, and also an opportunity to learn for the implementation during the 2031. While we speak about 2015's partial success, which will also be important to come back to the 2031 plan. So, what are the big proposals in the 2031 plan, which one as a citizen must kind of look out for? I think there are many interesting proposals, and one of the proposal would be the special development zone. But again, this depends on large-scale land acquisition or large-scale partnerships. Depends on large-scale finances, cost recovery, or trying to generate revenue through sales. Also dependent on living taxes and charges. So this is quite a pretty difficult spot for BDA to kind of implement. Roads which are again to be implemented are solely dependent on the voluntary relinquishment or submission of lands by the private owners. So otherwise, BDA has to think about acquisition, which is a difficult part of the implementation part. In some instances, like the noble idea of protecting the lakes, there have been instances where 75 meters of buffer has been marked around the lakes. Now, while this seems to be an extremely good idea to implement, conceptualize on the plan, it will be very difficult to implement it on the ground, because we're talking about 60 to 70 square kilometers of area and large built-up areas already being developed within these buffers. So what would be the further plan of action if these areas have to be reallocated or kind of rehoused in a different place? So the operationalization of the plan is not really mentioned at all. So there seems to be a little doubt about the intention of implementing such of those proposals. Another interesting thing which I can kind of look at in the plan for the first of its kind is the massive documentation of heritage properties and heritage within the city, mainly through the built heritage. And within the built heritage, the work that has gone in terms of identifying it also involves large number of private properties. Now, large private properties, the level of confidence has to be enhanced for the private owners to kind of accept some kind of restrictions on the heritage aspects. So I think there is definitely a detailed plan or a detailed scheme that needs to kind of operationalize this larger idea. Another important aspect which also comes across on my mind is the idea of the affordable housing. While you have the central government's schemes which are being focused on provision of affordable housing, the costly and expensive land is seriously an impediment for realizing low cost housing. It means to say it is BDA's plan of action that is going to translate into sustainable, into economical housing for the poor. Now, when I say poor, almost 50 to 60% of Bangalore as it stands today is unable to access the formal housing market. I think it is an important part because of BDA's mandate to take care of housing, to look at how affordable housing can take shape. Another example that comes to my mind is that of the TOD, or the Transit-Oriented Development. This is a very important concept which says that you'll have to develop in a high density format around the various transport hubs. Now there are many TOD zones that have been identified in the plan, but these require, in addition to the additional buildability factor, which is called the FAR or the floor space index, other components such as the infrastructure provision, consensus of the people for whom this particular proposal has been made, and interdepartmental coordination to achieve the final objective of not only creating higher densities but also to in some ways capture the additional advantage from this increase of buildability and put that as revenues for the government to finance the project. The other one could be, development of large-scale parks. Quite often we are stating that we haven't had much of the open spaces in the city. Now, development of very large regional parks has been a concept even in the earlier 1995 Comprehensive Development Plan. But due to the difficulties in land acquisition and mobilization, which involves private players and private farmers, the government had to really give up on those proposals. They could not take shape. So I think this is the same concern. Other than the government forest lands, I think getting a larger park in the city, within the urban areas, is still going to remain as a challenge. There are also other proposals which are highly fiscal oriented. When I say fiscal oriented, which is about buying additional FAR, or floor area ratio, through a premium FAR concept. This is something that has been introduced in order to kind of, in a way, to stimulate the market for TDR. Now I say TDR means basically the transfer of development right, which means to say if you forfeit a portion of land, you get in exchange or in lieu of that land a certain development right. Now this development right it is possible to trade this development right in the market. In order to encourage road widening, to encourage other proposals, the TDR market is being given a boost indirectly through a premium FAR. But these have a very large scale consequences for the long-term future of the city. So these could be points of great concern and also in-depth study in order to actually put them on the ground for implementation. The other aspect is that the plan kind of highlights two chapters, which are very interesting chapters. It talks about financing the plan for its implementation and identifies rightly the various projects and the various stakeholders who are involved in the implementation of these projects. While this chart is a very interesting textbook case, it's extraordinarily difficult to get an interdepartmental coordination, mobilization of finances, consensus on the final outcome. These are some practical problems which are related to the implementation. While having said that, it's not easy to even finance both infrastructure or development because the model that we are currently pursuing is not adequate to kind of finance these developments. The idea of raising levies, ideas of laying charges, these are very, very incremental and they are not going to fetch big sums to finance these projects. So it would be interesting to see how large-scale acquisition of land, large-scale mobilization of land dependency is reduced. Look at simpler ways of bringing in new instruments which do not distort the market in terms of handing out TDRs or development rights and also not jeopardizing the long-term future. I think that would be a very important aspect of the plan implementation. While having said that, I think what is clearly emerging out of this discussion is that one size or one large plan cannot really address a lot of these ground realities. What this means to say is that there is a need in order to accommodate a second set of plan. The second set of plan would enable not only translating the big ideas, but it will actually be the operational plan at which the citizens can participate. Now, the question is, how can citizens participate into the plan making process in the implementation of the plan? The question is that you need a second level plan without which the participation of citizens cannot be done meaningfully. So this brings about another aspect. We do definitely need a second set of plans, which is called as the local area plans, or you can call them as the local development plans, which in some ways is a subset of this master plan. Now, how can these plans be made and how can implementation happen? It can happen both ways, that that you have a larger agenda which is being set by the master plan, but the detailing, the little negotiations that are required to happen, the little adjustments that are likely to happen, the reallocations that are likely to happen are necessarily accommodated within this local area plans. Now, the local area plan is the plan which will enable the citizen to really participate in a democratic manner. While the citizen can play a very important role in monitoring, evaluation, and also participate in the implementation of the various proposals proposed by the master plan, the other corresponding roles are the large-scale commitments which needs to be made by the government itself. Now, the proponent of the plan being the government at some level has to make the long-term commitments. Now, the long-term commitments are usually requiring fund sizes which are almost double the state budget or the city budget. Now, for projects such as these, it will be very, very important for the government to make the first step of making this commitment. For example, we look at projects like the commuter rail service, which is a very interesting and excellent project that requires about 12 to 15,000 crores for implementation. Now, this is a large sum of money that the government can make its first step in its commitment. Decentralization has been for very long being discussed, but to get this into implementation, you need really a rail and a road network which can effectively connect to many of these other ring towns and satellite towns. While we say that the central role of BDA is not to be diluted, today the role of the BDA as it's seen is the central role of a small-time developer looking at roads and a few infrastructure projects for development. However, its mandate is much larger to look at both two aspects, which is the planning aspect and also the development aspects. In the first place, the BDA's act enables them to both plan and develop, which means to say the scope for BDA itself is much larger other than just mere land acquisition and layout development. So I think there is a need for, from an implementation perspective, for BDA to be kind of either strengthened or to think about many other ways on how BDA can work along with other organizations. The important energy that is around in the system for a city like Bangalore is the emergence of a very strong private sector. Now, I think the private sector can play a very important role provided they are regulated and they try to fulfill certain public domain objectives. Now, that is a critical articulation which this particular master plan can aim to do. While having said that, there is also the large community energy which is around. I think at a level little lesser than the master plan itself can be disaggregated into different plans for implementation, and the citizen energy should be directed in those little plans. Now, I think in summary, I would see that though the implementation of the plan is a very large idea and usually dominated by institutional interests and by government mechanisms, there is significant scope and I would say contribution from the citizen that can go into implementation. The other part of the implementation story is the various data with which departments are kind of working. There is a model which is being proposed in the master plan, which says that they would build a common platform which enables them to share data to various departments and to bring that. This has been fairly an old idea for the last 15 years. It's time that it takes shape, and therefore a lot of this data can actually be crowdsourced, cleaned up by the department and be utilized for better management and implementation. To summarize the implementation of the master plan, especially the new or the draft provisional master plan RMP 2031 published by the BDA, it will be important to post suggestions and comments with respect to the proposals that are contained in them. In order to do this, we have created a website uru.in that displays the revised master plan maps, in which one can click their geographical location or the proposal which they want to kind of view and suitably comment on it and submit it on the site. Now this information is going to be transmitted to the BDA within the 60 days time frame which has been given for public consultation. So we sincerely hope that a lot of people will look at these proposals being proposed within the master plan from its implementation angle and challenges, and put in their comments by using uru.in. Thank you very much.